Hey, what's going on, everybody? Ryan Newpel here, Noob Sports Show, episode 143. Thank you so much for tuning in through all 143 episodes. I cannot believe we are getting towards 150. That's crazy. Hope you're doing well today. Hope everything is well in your world. And as always, we have another special guest that we will get to here in just a bit. Really excited for this conversation today, and kind of a unique product that I think you guys will enjoy, especially if you're racing fans. You'll definitely enjoy this. So we'll get into that in a second. But first, I wanted to encourage anyone watching live, anyone that's a part of this, if you want to ask questions of the guest, of myself, of anyone, feel free. Put it in the comments on whatever you're watching it on, Facebook, YouTube, whatever else we're on, Twitch. We're all over the place. So wherever you find a place to put a comment, put it on. It'll come up here. We'll pop it up and we'll ask the questions as they come in. So thanks again, and let's jump right in. So we today have Ross Fruin, who's the founder of GridRival. Let's get Ross on here. Ross, how are you today?
Morning, man. How you doing? Thanks for having me today.
Absolutely. I'm doing well here in it's not so sunny Orlando, Florida. Today's a little rainy, but I'm doing well. How are you there in Portland, Oregon?
Very wet as well. It's rain season over here, but yeah, good. Exciting times. Lots going on, and
Yeah.
excited to kind of share anything you want to talk about today.
Awesome. I'm excited to dive in as well and learn a little bit about what you got going on. But first, let's learn about you. Let's learn a little bit about your past and kind of how you got to where you are today. So, what made you get to where you are? Just give us a little background of yourself.
Yeah, good question. So I've kind of always been entrepreneurial. Was pushed in that direction by my father in my early 20s. And so I've kind of been, working for myself in one way, shape, or form. Started my first business when I was 28, which is a media buying agency that I grew for about 6 or 7 years. And along that journey, kind of this whole fantasy sports craze and sports betting phenomenon started to transform, and saw a really huge opportunity in the motorsports sector. Started a product totally on the side, which never intended to be a business at this form of scale, and it eventually turned into that, which I'm sure we'll talk about today. But yeah, I've kind of just always been passionate motorsports fan, passionate entrepreneur, and those two things happened to collide about 3 years back, which got me to the start of GridRival.
That's awesome. It's funny how sometimes sometimes some of the best products, businesses, whatever, are kind of accidents, right? They kind of just happen as you start diving into your passion or into whatever problem you're trying to solve. And sounds like that may be where your GridRival came from. So let's talk GridRival. What is
Yeah.
GridRival? Tell us a little bit about it specifically. What's the purpose of it?
Yep. So I kind of I say that GridRival is a sports betting startup, and as most sports betting startups, we don't actually have betting on our platform yet, because as you probably know, there's a tremendous amount of barriers and compliance hurdles and stuff they have to go through before you can get there. But that's ultimately our goal, and kind of how we are building towards that. We started as a season-long fantasy game for motorsports specifically. We have two sports on our platform right now, which are Formula One and MotoGP. And like I said, it kind of started as an accident. I go to the Formula One race every year in Texas, and we rent an RV and we kind of live on the track for 4 or 5 days. And kind of the tipping point for me starting this project was in 2016. We were at the race. It was the Thursday evening before the event, and I was inside our RV and I could hear one of my friends outside. He was screaming. So I went outside and I was like, "Hey, what's going on?" And it turns out he was yelling. He was watching a football game and he was yelling at his phone because his fantasy league, he was losing in his fantasy league. And so I just kind of remember that being the point where I was like, God, I wish something existed in for the sports that I love that would drive that level of engagement.
Mm.
And we didn't find anything compelling at the time. So again, totally as a side project, built kind of a really basic season-long league-based game. It was desktop, web only, barely even worked on a phone. We launched it in 2017 and signed up about 22,000 people in a week.
Jeez. Wow.
Yeah. And so that was the point. That was kind of the aha moment for me when I
Yeah.
really
Proof of
started
concept,
to assess.
right? Check.
Yeah, exactly. And so for obvious reasons, I started doing a lot more industry research. And this was a year before PASPA was repealed. So it was actually kind of that like dark era where the FanDuels and DraftKings of the world were really kind of fighting for their survival. It was when they were having to go and prove, at a state by state level that daily fantasy sports was legal. And so, the opportunity was maybe not as huge as it was a year later when Passport was appealed. And it was about that time I had the opportunity to sell the company I was running, which opened the door to go pursue this full time. And so that happened in early 2019, went full time. We raised some money to get this MVP out and had our first major kind of launch this last March with the start of the seasons of both the sports I mentioned. And really looking forward to the opportunity to kind of fill what we think is a pretty huge gap with a very, very large niche audience. Motorsports in the United States is, it's excitingly, it's growing quicker than I think it probably ever has in the last 15 or 20 years since I've been a motorsports fan. But even then, historically, racing in the United States is kind of like soccer was here 40 years ago. I think it's still kind of an emerging sport relative to the rest of the world. If you go to the United Kingdom and other parts of Europe and Brazil and MotoGP and Formula One and sports car racing are just have huge following.
Yeah.
When you combine the audiences of these sports, there's over 1 billion people every year that interact with them, and so we didn't really see anybody focusing on this audience in a unique and authentic way in the fantasy or sports betting arena. And so we really thought it was a huge opportunity to go pursue them again in an authentic way that was unique to motorsports, that was only motorsport specific. And so that journey started, like I said, full time in 2019. We just announced on Monday our first major kind of funding round. We raised $3 million really to get through a lot of the compliance hurdles that we need to. And the plan is to have our first kind of real money games live early next season for players in select states, the United States, and most of the UK.
Wow. Well, congrats on the early success and congrats on the fundraising. I mean, that's always a big hurdle to cross and
Yeah.
should catapult you kind of to the next level. And, you just kind of led me into my first or next question. And it was going to be around the real money piece of it and how the money, everybody wants to know, oh, how can I win money playing fantasy sports, sports betting, whatever it is. So tell us a little bit about how that's going to work. Is it how the prizes and the entries and all of that set up with GridRival?
Yep. So I'll kind of tell you what the first games will look like. And then obviously, as we grow and go through continued fundraising and build the business, we're going to continue to iterate and add more, opportunities for different types of games and stuff. But essentially what we're doing this first time around is very traditional, like they call it salary cap fantasy structured games where you're kind of joining in mini leagues or head-to-head competitions. You start with $100 million in fantasy budget. And with that budget, you pick five drivers in an event, and then one constructor or team, depending on how the individual racing series is structured. And then we assign points to real life competition in a number of different ways. Some are kind of intuitive, race finish position, qualifying position. Some are things that we've algorithms we created on our own to track different things that are nuanced to motorsports specifically. And then essentially you're competing on a race to race basis. So there's kind of two models. You have a league where you're playing across the entire season. And then the major part that we're going to be adding early next season is daily fantasy. So where you're competing really with the intention of winning money versus like the camaraderie piece of it and the community piece of it that a league drives, competing for money. And then, from there, we have a lot of ambitions to add different types of games, pick 'em type games, single event statistic or single athlete statistic, over unders and stuff like that. And then the ultimate goal, which is further down the road, is more of a fixed odds sportsbook type product in some of the select geographies that we plan to enter into.
That's amazing. That's really cool. I love how it's very focused on what you love, right? Because most of these fantasy platforms or sports betting, sports books and operators, they're across everything, right? And so
Yep, for
I
sure.
love that you guys are just doing one thing really, really well, and you're really serving that audience, which, as you said, is growing, and the sport is growing as well. I mean, there's a huge race this weekend. I believe you can probably talk a little more about that race yourself, but On a
Yep.
typical big race like that, what type of interest is there across the United States and across the world? I mean, is it truly exploding we hear?
Yeah, it's exploded in the U.S. Like I said, it's already. Assuming we're talking about Formula One, which was the race last weekend.
Yes, yeah,
Formula One is the biggest motorsport in the world. It's kind of the pinnacle of racing when it comes to technology and drivers and money and everything. Um, Tremendous audience, and you are correct. Formula One has been trying to penetrate the U.S. market
yeah.
for a very long time. 20, 30 years,
Mm,
and really has not just got the formula exact until the last 3 or 4 years.
mm,
If you've been following it all, it was Formula One controlling interest was acquired by a company that was based out of the United States called Liberty Media.
mm.
And I think they've done an incredible job at really turning the sport around and penetrating the US audience, primarily through a documentary on Netflix called Drive to Survive that's driven, a ton of engagement and interest around the sport. But yeah, the race in Austin last week was reportedly the largest race audience in Formula One history. There was some like 400,000 attendees across the 3-day event.
Really?
Um,
Wow.
and Yeah, and so a lot of people in the United States, when they think about motorsports, they typically think about NASCAR. If they ever think
Yeah.
about motorsports, they typically think about NASCAR, maybe the Indy 500, and increasingly Formula One, which is really exciting. But a lot of people don't really understand, the width and depth of its audience globally. F1 specifically,
Hmm.
their races generate the same amount of viewership as the Super Bowl, every single one of them. And there's, 20 to 22 a year. And most people don't realize the scope of it. And so it is, those viewers are spread across the world versus with the Super Bowl, the majority of them are in the United States.
Sure.
But it does have tremendous audience, and it's really just the tip of a very large motorsports iceberg. There's sports car racing, in the United States, we have IndyCar and NASCAR. Outside the United States, there's Le Mans, and there's Australian supercars and World Rally. And, it is a unique audience. And going back to what you're saying, I think looking at the sports betting space specifically, I think that's one of the big areas where you see a lot of money being invested is in the niche focus. There's startups right now that are focused specifically on, mixed martial arts or different, the nuances of the different sports.
Yep.
And I think that's going to be a big trend that we see over the next 5 to 10 years as the sports betting space progresses, versus kind of these massive sport agnostic platforms where if you look at the gamification from hockey to football to cricket to NASCAR, it's
Hmm.
kind of the same thing, right? There's not a lot of
Yeah.
uniqueness to it. And I think there's just a huge opportunity to build a lot of value in the market from building unique games that are really community and content driven, and really that have high entertainment value too. I think that's one of the big trends that I'm seeing is focusing on a kind of a type of game or a method of gaming where even if you remove the money from it, it's still fun and it's still an
Yeah.
enjoyable experience. And so that's really what we're working on, because we believe that the next generation of sports bettors are really the enthusiasts, right? They're the
Mm.
people that will put money on an event, but it's less because they want to win money and more because they want to heighten their experience and have fun with their friends and all those sorts of things. And so we've kind of tried to combine all that into a product that's motorsport specific.
I love it. You're doing a great job. I mean, I'm putting up GridRival next to this, so anybody watching, they can kind of see a little bit on the website, has some screenshots. I mean, it certainly looks like you have everything in order and you are just rocking and rolling. But Ross, we all know as entrepreneurs, as business owners, there's always challenges. I'm sure you went through so many challenges that you can't even count them. But I'm going to
Yeah.
ask you kind of more of a businessy type question, because that's what I
Yep.
love most is the business of all of this, right? And what
Yep.
is one of the challenges maybe that stands out as you went through this journey? You went through the journey of creating it and you got to where you are today. What's one challenge that you really maybe didn't see, or just one of the bigger ones that you kind of had to overcome?
Yeah, I think so I kind of think of those in like two buckets, and I'll answer this like really maybe specific to this industry because we're kind of here talking about, sports and
Yeah.
betting and stuff like that. There's obviously tremendous challenges in any business with hiring good people, and raising money is its own thing. um, but I think really specific to this industry is just the compliance and regulatory barriers that have to be crossed. I mean, I did a tremendous amount of research on this before I ever started this business, because you got to know what you're getting into. But even then, at kind of every turn we take, it's just, the in the United States specifically, this is a really nascent industry. It has been 3 years since PASPA was repealed, but as we know, the way that states create laws is not exactly as fast as startups operate. It's usually
Yeah.
quite a bit
Yeah.
slower. And so, you know, just getting a bank account and getting a payment processor and getting the ability to put consumer funds into a product is
Mhm.
really quite difficult in this industry. And it's a great thing once you're through it because it's kind of a built-in barrier of entry for
Sure.
other businesses. But I just think the requirements there have always at every turn we've kind of gotten used to the fact that, like, oh yeah, there's more than we thought there would be, and that's just part of it.
Yeah.
And luckily there's more and more startups, and more, our investors have seen a lot of these challenges in other startups, and so we know how to navigate them. But compare it to, like, if you're starting an e-commerce site and you're just selling shoes, like, you get set up with Stripe and PayPal and Venmo, and you
Yeah.
can do that all
Yeah.
within a couple hours. You can get a
Yep.
site up and you can take payments and you can set up a bank account. In this space, it's 6 months of work,
Oh
and
gosh.
obviously a lot of money that goes with all
Yeah.
those,
Sure.
compliance and anti-money laundering policies and things that
Oh
you have to
yeah.
build internally. So that's probably the biggest one, that's kind of
Yep.
specific to the space.
Yeah, and you're not the just to comfort you a little, you're not the first one to have that exact same answer on this show. So that seems to
Yeah.
be definitely one of the biggest challenges for startups in, the sports betting, DFS, any of that space. I mean, just dealing with the regulations and the state by state intricacies and everything that's going on across the United States. I mean, why do they make it so dang complicated, huh? It's like,
Yeah,
come
I
on.
know. And there is, the good news is with every problem, there's going to be startups that seek to solve it. I think there's a really
True.
big kind of like picks and shovel side of this industry. There's a lot of startups in the B2B that are working
Mhm.
on supporting the infrastructure behind operators like us. I
Gotcha.
talked to a company last week called Compliable. It's a really interesting startup that's really
Hmm.
all looking towards making the compliance side of this a lot easier for startups
Nice.
and not even startups, but enterprise size operators to be able to manage all of the
Yeah.
compliance stuff that's happening in the space. And so I think over time we're going to see it get simpler.
Yeah.
It's still going to be. I mean, it's a kind of a lot of entities in the banking and payment space consider it gambling, and so
Yeah.
I don't think we're probably ever going to get away from it being regulated in a way.
Hmm.
And a lot of that stuff is good. It's good for the consumer from a protection standpoint, a security standpoint. So I think there are things that are properly there,
Yeah.
but doesn't mean they're difficult. And you are correct. One of the challenges the U.S. has versus a place like the United Kingdom, which is a very betting friendly environment. They've been doing it for a long time. It's not really taboo there. They have an infrastructure set up from a compliance perspective, but
Sure.
it's done at a federal level.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so when you have a license in the UK, you can offer a product to the entire UK versus, here it's done at a state by state level, which again, it's the best thing for us as Americans to have that state by state system. It does a lot to protect us and, create differences from a state by state level. But in a business like this, it's, when you have to operate by a different set of laws in one state than another state, it creates
Yeah.
a lot of work. And so, I think that's one of the big challenges that any operator has to solve as they enter the
Absolutely.
industry. And I think it's also, like I said, going to be something that we see a lot of investment going into solving those
Sure.
problems more on the kind of B2B side of things.
Sure. Sure. Ross Fruin, the founder at GridRival. Ross, I don't want to keep you too long. I told you around 20 minutes, so
Yeah.
I don't want to keep you too much longer. But I do have maybe another question or two for you.
Yeah.
I can tell you're a really bright entrepreneur, a really bright business owner.
No, thank you.
Um, yeah, I can just tell. So I like to ask this question sometimes, not very often, but sometimes. What's one piece of advice? Now I'm not talking challenges, but maybe one piece of advice you'd have for up and coming entrepreneurs who are looking to get in. Obviously, they're not looking to get into the auto racing, sports betting space, maybe, but the
Yeah.
iGaming, sports betting world. Maybe they have an idea or they have something that they're trying to get off the ground. There's a lot of people looking to do something in this space right now. And what's one piece of advice you'd have if you were starting over, or if you're talking to yourself right when you were starting now? What would be one just big general piece of advice you'd have for them?
Yeah, I think I can give my like sports betting kind of DFS advice, and then maybe more like a general one. I think on the gaming side, I think the advice I'd have was really have like kind of a come to Jesus with yourself and seek input from others in the industry about the uniqueness of either the product or the
Yeah.
technology. Because one of the things I've seen a lot is like startups that they maybe think there's this one specific type of game that will make this more fun, and a lot of those people just immediately get copied. And so I think the product has to be unique enough to where you can either capture like an unpenetrated audience, which is really our play. I look at this as much less of sports betting play and much more an audience play. Like we're going after an audience. Our kind of theory around it is that we can capture them better than anyone else. And so I think just like really have an honest conversation with yourself about, is the product unique? If maybe the gamification isn't unique, maybe the tech that runs it is somehow unique and protectable. Um, and then more on the business side, I think, you know, one of the challenges when you're building something that is really unique up front is it's not always obvious. And when things aren't obvious, it makes it difficult to go to the market and raise money. And to be in the space, it's very difficult to enter the space without raising money because of all the things we talked about and the hurdles you have
Yep.
to get through.
Yep.
And so I think one of the challenges that I found early on, 3 years ago, before motorsports was exploding in the United States, I had moments where it was really difficult. I had to question myself, like, gosh, am I like, is this is this really what I think it's going to be? And there was moments where I had to just really assess and look at the data and go back and forth and really question whether or not it was the right move to continue. And those were difficult times,
Yeah.
because when you're getting, fundraising is hard in and of itself, because if you're really good at fundraising, 1 out of 20 people is going to tell you yes, and they're going to
Mm.
invest. Like the best of us. And so that comes with 19 out of 20 people explaining to you why your business is not going to work and why it's not big enough and whatever, and why your team's not good enough. And that can be challenging. And so you just have to have a lot of confidence in your market and what you're doing and your own abilities, and just kind of stick with it and believe it. One of my
Yep.
favorite quotes is that, like I think it's before something is genius, it's always crazy, right?
Mm.
And
Yeah.
and I think
Very
that I think
true.
the best largest ideas in the world at their earliest stages, when people heard them, they're probably like, God, are you serious? Like,
Hmm.
I remember I remember in 2011, I was sharing an office with another company, and one of the engineers from that company was obsessed with Bitcoin.
Yep.
And back then, I just remember hearing it and being like, "This is like the dumbest thing ever. This is not going to go anywhere." And I that was a painful lesson.
Yeah.
And
Yep.
so I pay a lot more attention to trends now, literally because that happened. But that's tough. It's a tough thing that entrepreneurs have to go through as they're scaling a
Yeah.
business, is the rejection that comes with building something truly unique.
Yep.
That's a new market and a new audience that people haven't experienced before.
Yep. Great advice. Great advice. Really appreciate that, Ross. All right. Any last words? Anything, maybe about Grid Rival, where you're headed, anything coming up that's really exciting that you want everybody to check out? How can they get to start playing Grid Rival? Where can they find it?
Yep.
Give me all that here to end this show.
Yeah, so best place is in either the iOS or Android store. You can download us. You can visit gridrival.com, get links to those places as well. We do have a full desktop web application. Other than that, I think the only thing I'd say is, find a race coming up for Formula One or MotoGP or IndyCar, NASCAR, or some way to try and get involved. Watch Drive to Survive on Netflix. Lots of really exciting stuff happening in the racing space, and we're really passionate and interested to see where it goes.
Passionate, interested, and sounds like positioned well as well to kind of take advantage and really be in the driver's seat. No pun intended
Yeah.
for this big boom of auto racing. So, congrats, Ross. Really appreciate you joining me today, and appreciate
Our
everybody
pleasure.
tuning in as well. So, good luck to you. And if you ever need anything from me, be sure to reach back out.
Appreciate it. Thanks so much.
All right, take care, Ross. That was Ross Fruin, the founder at GridRival. He is doing some great things. GridRival.com. Check him out in the App Store, Google, Apple, wherever else you can find it, GridRival.com. We'll actually put all the comments out in the show notes for this show afterwards, so you don't have to write them down. Go and just click them. We'll have those up later. Appreciate everybody tuning in. Stay safe. Have a good one. Until next time, I'm Ryan Newpol, Noob Sports Show. Take care. Bye bye.